Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 68.
Ben.
Yes.
1968 was a red letter year for Arizona, specifically Lake Havasu City, Arizona.
Where London Bridge is located?
You did...
Did I spoil a surprise? We can start over. I didn't read the notes. We talked about this before. I didn't know that happened in 1968.
Yeah, killed it. I had this whole big thing. No, it's fine. It's fine. We'll just press forward from here. So Lake Havasu City, Arizona, started as an Army Air Corps rest camp in World War II called Site 6. Then Robert P. McCulloch bought 3,353 acres of the land, and he planned this big, awesome, sprawling community on the Colorado River between Arizona and California. I've never been there. It's in the middle of no place. And so he planned this big community, and he had a terrible time actually selling any of the land because, as mentioned, it's in the middle of nowhere. And so his real estate agent, I don't know why, he heard that London, the city of London, was selling London Bridge for, at the time, $2.46 million, which was actually...
It was getting old and they need to replace it, but they figured they could get some money out of it because of its historical significance.
That was £1 million sterling back then. And then in today's money, that's like a little over $20 million. And so he bought it. I don't know how, but the real estate agent convinced this rich guy in the middle of Arizona to buy the London Bridge to use as a tourist attraction to try to make his planned community even better.
Wow. So there are joking songs that joke about oceanfront property in Arizona. Like, I can't imagine that it didn't cost him more in transportation and construction to get that thing there than it did to buy it in the first place.
So he cut a deal with some transport company, and he got it, like, the actual shipping was all done on one ship in one go for way cheaper than he would have normally paid. It was like some proof of concept of this new ship design or something. Like, he really had an in when it came to the shipping costs.
Okay.
But they had to categorize or catalog every brick of the London Bridge, then dismantle it piece by piece, and then carefully, painstakingly reconstruct it. And they did, and they reconstructed the London Bridge in Lake Havasu City, Arizona.
See, I can imagine using a crane to, like, lower it onto a barge in the Thames River, but still, Arizona's landlocked.
So they took it apart piece by piece, like I said, and they didn't actually, like, use any of the structural pieces. There was a concrete bridge, and they just used, like, the stone facade on the outside.
Okay, this is Theseus's London Bridge.
Yes, it's technically London Bridge because it uses some of the same pieces. Now, I have a couple of fun facts for you that are really funny to me. There is this pervading rumor in history that says McCulloch thought he was buying the Tower Bridge, which is a much more iconic bridge.
Yes, it's the one you think of that Spider-Man defeated Magneto or Mysterio on.
Yes, like the one that you dropped from a height in your house made of Legos and
yeah, the one I own a model of in my house and I smashed on the floor. Yes.
McCulloch denies these rumors because freaking, of course you would. If you bought the wrong bridge and then it was put in front of you, it's like, oh, I thought it was the Tower Bridge. No, I knew it was this bridge the whole time. You're never going to admit that.
Yeah, and it's the one in the songs.
Yeah, the second fun fact, and this is my favorite, is they built it over land. Like, they had a road and they just built the bridge to nowhere. Like, it was just from one piece of land to another piece of land.
I bet that was the easiest bridge building ever.
And then after it was built, they had a construction company dig a canal out underneath it to make it a bridge over water.
Okay, I've seen, I don't know, like MTV Spring Break Weekend kind of things where there's just teenagers floating on rafts all around this thing, and they're like, that's a London Bridge!
Because,
woo!
Like, if you're a teenager on spring break in Lake Havasu, you'll woo anything, I promise.
Cool. I also have a fun fact about London Bridge. The one they replaced it with has these little tri-circle-shaped cutouts that at certain times of the day make a shadow on the ground that looks like a penis all the way across the bridge, like 1,000 of them.
I think I've seen that as a meme on the internet. Yeah. But it's good to know that that's the new London Bridge.
That's new London Bridge.
Good job, London.
All right, I got a follow-up for you. So this week was kind of the end of the latest round of vintage cube on Magic Online. So you proposed that we add a bit of content to our YouTube channel. Folks, if you haven't seen it, you can go out to our YouTube channel. There's a bit of content out there. Bad at Magic YouTube channel. Link in the show notes. And this time we just decided to do something we hadn't done before, which is kind of common for people that are trying to find a unique way to stream content or create content for the internet. And that is to give a friend what's known as a stipulation.
Yes, and so what that means is before we go into the draft, both parties obviously know what's in the draft, like most of the cards that exist, the archetypes, blah, blah, blah. And so then you set a rule for the other person. Oh, you can only draft artifacts if there's some in the pack, or you have to take a land if there's a land in the pack, something like that.
Right.
And in this case, Ben straight up stole $10 from me. Just like taking the money right out of my hands. It was so ridiculous.
The thing I underestimated was your inability to get over it.
Listeners, you'll have to go watch the YouTube channel, but I swear, like, Ben could not have come up with a more perfect rule to screw me harder in that draft than if he had tried. If he had foreknowledge of the future, he could have done better.
The stipulation I gave Josh was that he couldn't draft blue cards. And of the 9 most broken cards in Magic, I think 5 of them are blue.
Yeah,
and
something like that.
You saw 3 of those.
Yeah, I would have had the world's most insane blue deck.
Yeah, it would have been really good. And like you said, I couldn't see the future. I was just picking what I thought would be an interesting and provocative stipulation, and it didn't work out so good. Did you win any of those games and of those 3 matches?
No, I went 0-3. Like $10 just straight down the toilet. Thanks, buddy.
Okay. Sorry, Josh. I was just trying to make interesting content for the people. All right. Last time I went on a crazy tangent, introduced a new segment called Bad at Eating, and talked about s'mores for way too long. And because of that, I wanted to share one more story.
There's one more story about s'mores? Seriously?
Okay, so last time I mentioned a website on the internet called S'mores Scout, and the creator of the website, Chris, actually listened to our podcast this week and contacted me about it. So that was interesting. I appreciate it, Chris. But the story I want to tell you is after my family moved to Italy in 2012, we used to go out on our building was kind of like think of it like a condominium. There were these large people stacks of towers, so you're kind of squished close together to people, and every house had balconies on every level. Ours had like 5 levels. It was like a tri-split level where it was 3 up, 3 down, but different front and back. So there's like a balcony on every single level. Our house had 5 balconies. I'm not even kidding. And one of them went out into a patio where we had a barbecue, and we would go out there and barbecue sometimes, and you could see our neighbors just like right over the fence. They were a couple of mixed European ancestry. One was a woman from the Netherlands. The other one was a man from Italy. Their daughter could speak like 100 languages. It was great. So we were out there barbecuing one time. We finished cooking up some hot dogs. We'd gotten at the commissary on the local American installation, and anybody in Europe has seen hot dogs. But then we took the coals of the fire and we started making s'mores. And they kind of poked their heads over the fence and like, "What are you doing?" And we're like, "We're having s'mores." And they said, "What's that?" And it was at this moment that I realized that this is an American classic. It hasn't made it across. Like, Europeans don't do this. They don't know what this is.
Okay.
So I gleefully felt like Harrison Ford in Mosquito Coast, where he went down to the Amazon jungle and built a refrigerator so he could introduce people that had never seen ice before in their entire life. Ice.
It's like, let me introduce you, Europeans, to the pinnacle of American technology, engineering, and culture.
Yeah.
It is 3 forms of pure sugar, like put together in different textures, superheated, and mushed together into what is possibly the most unhealthy thing that you can devour.
Yes, so that was it. And Europeans' opinions on American food tends to be that it's too sweet, and I'm sure it was. So I prepared a couple for them and handed them on a paper plate over the fence and stood there probably with way too much anticipation on my face. You know, like when you're expecting somebody to like your favorite movie or your favorite song or your favorite treat, and you're like, "So, what do you think?"
Ben, you're just retelling the story and you're physically vibrating. I can see it from here. Like, I can't imagine how giddy you were when you were doing it.
They said they liked it. I doubt they went out looking for the ingredients so they can make another. But I got to introduce someone that had never had a s'more before as a grown-up to it, and it was great.
Well, shout out to Chris for listening to the podcast. Thank you for the cross promotion, I guess. And I'm willing to bet, I'm going to lay money down now that even Chris was listening to the podcast going, oh, man, this guy's talking about s'mores too long.
The creator of s'morescout.com was like, whoa, man, that was too much s'mores.
Whoa, buddy, reel it in.
All right, last time on Bad at Magic, I introduced the term skive as the British term for skipping school.
Yes.
And my wife mentioned me something I'd forgotten to mention on the podcast, and that is if you've read the Harry Potter books, you heard them use that term. Specifically, Ron Weasley's older brothers, Fred and George, would sell to kids what they called a skive box. And a skive box was full of novelties that would give you conditions that would make you get sent home from school. Like pills that would make you vomit or things that would make you... If you remember this from the books or the movies.
I do very subtly remember that as their introduction into, we're going to drop out of college and like open up a comic book shop. Yeah, their parents couldn't have been more disappointed with them. But
so
yeah,
their box was called the skive box. So you might have heard that term before.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks, Harry Potter.
One other follow-up item from last time, and that is you and I had a discussion about the... I completely blanked it. Free Guy, the movie Free Guy.
Yes.
And after we got done reviewing it, I was kind of following up with a few things, and I asked you about the character played by Taika Waititi that was like this megalomaniacal CEO, new age CEO type. And I said, Josh, have you ever met anyone like this? And you said, people like this don't exist.
Yes, and you know what's funny is since then, I think my wife has introduced me to one, and I came across an example of another.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you, I'll just give you like a 2-minute version of it, but there is one that I'd heard about. I forgot what we were having this discussion, but I want to tell you about him now. Josh, do you know the story of Zappos CEO Tony Hsieh?
I don't, actually.
Okay, so he was like the poster child for mid-2010s ridiculously successful startup entrepreneur. Tony Hsieh graduated from Harvard in the late 2000s and started doing startup companies, and he had a knack for it. He created a company called Leak Exchange that he sold like 2 years later to Microsoft for hundreds of millions of dollars. He created another company called Venture Frogs in 2011. He sold that one off to Microsoft, and then I don't know why he decided he needed to start selling shoes. The thing about his shoe company, Zappos, you might have heard of it, is that he really built what they were doing, even though their business was selling shoes. He built their corporate culture around really unconventional management ideas. He wasn't focusing on like productivity or what are some of the, like Six Sigma or those kinds of things, these traditional business ideas. He was focusing on this really radical, adventurous, creative, open-minded corporate culture. Maybe you've heard of the fact that he would hire a new employee, bring them onto the company, train them up, and then the day before they started work, he would offer them $10,000 to walk away.
Wow, no, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, that was something notorious that they did. Basically, if you want to be here, we want you to want to be here more than $10,000 worth.
Okay, so but if you said, it's not a trick question, like if you said yes, you didn't get the $10,000, you just got a crappy job.
But that was the thing. He was trying to create this place that was so great to work that you were willing to forego the $10,000 to stay there.
Man, I want to know how many people took him up on the $10,000.
That's a great question. I wonder if the answer is out there. I doubt they kept statistics on that kind of thing.
We'll follow it up for next time.
He became this kind of oracle of new age business thinking. He was having all these successful startups during the mid-2010s, and he sold Zappos to Amazon.com for $1.2 billion in 2009.
Nice. So he's just living on one of those big mega yachts we keep hearing about somewhere.
Yes. And he started turning into that crazy guy from Free Guy. Like, he would have these wild parties. He was into weird health things. He was just doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and it caught up with him. And he died 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. Yeah, really mysterious circumstances, and he was notorious for like weird diets and stuff, but everyone would just excuse it because they would say, well, look at all of his success he's having in business. Look at all the money he has, and so they just kind of didn't intervene and didn't help until it was too late.
You can be weird and self-destructive and successful. Those aren't mutually exclusive.
I know, but you get your Prince and your Michael Jackson and your Tony Hsieh, and you kind of go like, they just got surrounded by this, yes machine too early.
Listeners, if you know a multi-million-dollar successful person that is into self-destructive habits, feel free, reach out to them. Hey, how are you doing? Do you need a hug? Yeah. In the same line, like you're talking about, like, you're absolutely right. At the time I said those people didn't exist, but then this entire story about artesian builds blew up on the internet. Have you heard
What's
of this?
That? No.
Oh my goodness. So Artesian Builds was the system integrator. It's this little company they had a bunch of employees, but they would just build computers, like custom spec computers for people, and then ship them.
Okay.
And the CEO was this like drama queen and just did it because he wanted to be friends with a bunch of like people that were on Twitch, and he wanted to be a Twitch celebrity. And that was kind of their gig, is like you would order a PC from them and they would build it on Twitch, and they would tell you what time they were streaming it live, them building the PC that they were going to ship to you.
Interesting.
Right. Kind of cool, right?
Yeah. So you get to watch a stream of them assembling your custom PC, and for a minute you're a star.
Yeah. So that's a pretty cool idea. And it was successful enough that they had 2 locations, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. Like, they were doing okay. But apparently this guy was just all about the vainglory and not about the business. And he did a giveaway. He's like, oh, anybody that's one of our Twitch affiliates, the people that advertise with them, we're going to build a custom PC, like super high spec, and we're going to give it to them for free. Well, on the stream, they randomly selected the person they were going to give it to. And it was this female streamer that had like a low amount of followers, lower than he wanted her to have. And he goes, you're not popular enough. We're going to pick somebody else instead.
Wow.
Less than a week later, that company went bankrupt because of all the
you want to cause an uprising and a controversy. Wow.
Yeah, so it's this whole big thing that happened. Gamers Nexus has done a bunch of videos about it. Like, it's, if you haven't heard about it, go check it out.
His vanity is what brought about the destruction of what looked to be a promising company.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Interesting. Well, another hobby topic we have on this podcast is daylight savings time, Josh. And I just went through it, and you didn't, because Arizona doesn't do that. But within 3 days of daylight savings time happening, the United States Senate brought a measure to vote for on the Senate floor, and it passed unanimously. Now, that doesn't mean it's in law. Like anyone that went to freshman civics class knows that when the Senate passes a law, then it goes to the House. So that's where it's at now. If the House were to vote it through, then daylight saving time would end in the fall of next year.
Which is, it's fantastic. Daylight saving time is stupid. I can tell you right now, without it in my life, I am happier and better for it. This was so off of my radar because I just don't care about daylight savings time because it doesn't happen where I live, and it's so nice. I had to hear about it on a late night TV show. And we were rewatching, like, oh, they're going to end daylight savings time. And I was like, what? And I paused it and I Googled it. I'm like, holy crap. And I sent you the link. And you're like, dude, I posted this as on our Facebook page like 2 hours ago. Where have you been?
Yeah, I'm definitely attuned to that issue. I didn't even, Okay, so, this is, and wow, I'm impressed that they were able to talk about it because I know they taped those shows earlier in the day, the late night talk show. And when I saw it, it was only like 4 hours old. So that's pretty good. The thing I didn't realize is they talked about how unanimously it went through the Senate, but every time this comes up, this isn't the last. They canceled daylight savings time back in the mid 70s
and
brought it back again. I guess apparently whatever modernization we need to do to make it irrelevant wasn't sufficient, and they ended up going back to it. So now as it's getting to it went through the Senate so fast it didn't have time to gather this resistance momentum. Did you know there are lobbies? Alicia was telling me about like the childcare lobby. Apparently they stand to lose money over this, so they're telling everyone why it's bad for your children to not do daylight savings time.
I can tell you it's bad for children to do daylight savings.
Right.
It's the stupidest thing.
Yeah. Anyway, I hope it passes. Oh my gosh, I hope it passes. Another thing that happened this week is a new Disney Pixar movie called Turning Red came out.
Yes, it came out to Disney Plus, and I don't know how, but the algorithms have my kids dead in their crosshairs. Because, like, the minute it was live, my kids were like, oh, we need to watch this new movie that's on Disney Plus. I'm like, what new movie that's on Disney Plus? This is a Pixar movie that I had not even heard of.
So I think we suffer from the same problem you just described. And my 12-year-old child was like, Dad, we have to watch this right now. I'm like, what? She's like, Turning Red. I couldn't even remember. I guess I'd seen a trailer for it a while ago. It's like some movie where a little girl turns into a panda, and that's a problem. I'm like, okay, we'll watch it.
I thought it was going to be a Teen Wolf remake, honestly.
Yeah?
Kind
Now
of.
I forget what the conflict was in that. I know it was like, Michael J. Fox kind of trading on his Back to the Future fame and making mediocre,
Don't ask me. Like, I just remember
movies.
him as a werewolf surfing on top of a van, thinking that was super dangerous.
So that's interesting because what it was him living out teenage fantasies. Like, he was a geek, he was underappreciated, and then him turning into a werewolf made it so that he was masculine and popular and good at sports and those kinds of things.
Oh, so it was a remake because these are both just coming of age stories.
Yes, exactly. Although I think Teen Wolf was just more focused on it just being a fantastical tale, and this one I think was meant to be much more allegorical.
Man, and it was super allegorical, and like it didn't even like try to hide it, because right at the beginning, when the incident first happens, it went straight full blown into prepubescent like menstrual cycle for the first time. And Ben, I was terrified because they started mentioning all of the words, and I just my head just like eyes got big and my head slowly rotates because you don't want to whip your neck because that tips off the kids that something important's happening. So I slowly turned to see what their reactions were, and they were varying stages of confused, but still engaged enough that they didn't want to stop to ask me. And I was like, oh, just please don't start asking me these questions. Please don't start asking me these questions. I was not prepared to have that talk. And and I wasn't prepared for how front and center that movie made it.
Okay, so let's talk about this for a minute, because this is part of the controversy, but not where I think I want to go with this. So I think the reason it caught you so off guard is because we have allowed, and I don't know if there was ever a time in the past, we've allowed as a society something so utterly natural and important and part of the reality of our existence to become so taboo to talk about.
Well, because it's part of the female processes, and anything that is female has been and should be shunned, and it has been that way since the Dark Ages, Ben. How dare these ladies talk about things that happen to them all the time that we should be perfectly okay with, but we're not because we're men.
So let's talk about the ritual. I don't know. I'll talk about what it was like for me, and you can talk about what it was like for you, where basically we understand in our minds that we need to talk about this, but we don't really want to because of all the societal taboos around it. So we assign it to one class period in one time in like middle school, where they separate the boys and the girls into separate rooms, and they talk to the boys about what changes you're going to be seeing to your body, and they talk to the girls about it, and then they consider it done forever. They wash their hands of it, they send everybody back in the same room and never talk about it again. Was it like that for you?
I didn't get that talk in middle school. No, they sent us I didn't get the health class until freshman year of high school, and it was co-ed.
Okay,
and so that class
that's a big change between my age group and yours.
Well, I don't know if that says we're more progressive or less progressive here in the state of Arizona. I don't want to make any qualifications about that. I will note that was the only class I had where, every class in high school, everybody's like leaning back, staring at the ceiling, like trying to be too cool for what's going on. That was the only class.
You guys were on the edge of your seats.
Everybody was still doing the body language like they didn't care, but everybody was paying rapt attention.
Yeah. What are the grown-ups going to tell me about the secrets of reproduction?
Basically.
Okay, so I've kind of had, I'll say, the privilege as a father of 3 daughters to just decide how I want to act towards this and see how that influences their attitude towards it. So from the very beginning, we've always just been very open about discussing it early and often. And so to them, like, it isn't a big deal.
I get that, and I hope I'm able to encourage that level of understanding in my kids. Here's the thing: is I feel like it's such a fine line between this is perfectly normal and you shouldn't be ashamed of it, and like asking questions and being curious is okay, but at the same time, this is a very private thing. So don't be going to school and shouting this from the top of the playground. That's not a thing that's going to be allowed or appropriate.
Okay, so you're describing, I think, one end of the slippery slope idea, and that is, what if they just think they can talk about this whenever they want? What is the worst that could happen? And to me, it's still not that bad. So what?
Then my kid is the kid that gets sent home with the note, or I'm the parent that gets the call like, hey, oh, by the way, your son's giving impromptu health classes at recess, and here's the list of 30 parents that are pissed off at you.
Right. I got that. And that was definitely a big part of the cultural tension that erupted into what we're going to talk about in a minute. The other end of the slippery slope scale that you didn't talk about is what if we're so overly concerned that people will talk about this, that we make it so unacceptable to talk about that they don't. So my mother's experience with this was as a child that her own mother was so ashamed to talk to her about it that she wouldn't and didn't. And so she just kind of had to figure it out on her own. And I've heard stories, not one I know of particular, but, like grown adults not knowing how to make babies because everyone stigmatizes this stuff so severely and is afraid to talk about it.
Well, these are, you're lumping in the female like cycles with like sexual reproduction. And those are slightly separate topics. At least in my like segment of the world, they are. There's the sex talk, and then there's the girl talk. Those are two different things. Okay,
I don't see why they're separate, but explain it to me. Help me understand why these two things are separate things.
Because me, as a man growing up in this culture, I had the sex talk. And that did not necessarily include what happens on the biological processes of the ladies. That was left to health class because that's just a biology thing. That doesn't have to do with like the part that's going to directly impact me. If that sounds really bad.
I get it, but I think that's a mistake.
We need to move off this topic, Ben, because the more I talk, the more I feel every female listener like zeroing in on me, like I'm the jerk here.
So that's a good transition point, because that's what happened here. And it wasn't necessarily about the menstruation thing. The whole thing is kind of a coming age tale set in like early 2000s in Toronto, where there was this community with a great proportion of Asian population and 4 girlfriends at a middle school. And then one of them has this moment where she's starting to go through puberty, I guess, but it manifests itself in this fantastical, magical way where she actually turns into a giant, fluffy red panda.
Which, I mean, little on the nose. Did it have to be red? Like, never mind. You see, again, I can feel the judgment. Ladies, I liked this movie. I like this movie more than Ben did. It's not coming across that way.
Okay, so it had... Okay, first of all, I want to say that they treated this movie in the 2020s way of a direct-to-DVD movie of 2 decades ago.
I will agree with that. Like, I didn't hear anything about it before it was just a thing.
Right. It didn't get promoted heavily. It didn't go to theaters. It just kind of popped up on Disney+. So that kind of says what the quality is of it. And that's kind of what this reviewer, Sean O'Connell, who works for Cinema Blend, did, where he placed a review on their website as a professional reviewer. You know, he's a member of the prestigious Critic Choice Board, and he basically just said, I wasn't really the target audience for this. Like, it didn't really appeal to me, it didn't resonate with me, and I didn't find it that appealing, and gave it like 2 out of 4 stars or something like that. And then the woke Twitter sphere crucified this guy, and it wasn't just people angrily tweeting. It reached the point where they ended up taking his review down off the website, and he ended up issuing a formal apology.
Well, now let's be clear. Like, we're like the picture that you just painted was a guy that was just clearly mentioning that this movie wasn't for him, and he just enjoyed it to that degree, and then he got crucified for it. Now, while part of that is true, it doesn't paint the whole picture. Like, there were parts of his actual review, like one of the lines that was in it was he didn't think that the message or the storyline in this movie resonated with even a minority of people in the audience. And like that, I remember it because it jumped out at me as, wait a minute, a story about a girl going through puberty doesn't resonate with a majority of people that are going to watch it? Bro, that's half of the world's population.
Right, and so he was getting accused of being racist or sexist or both. And some say that was in there. But there was just this... it's such a double standard, I think, to accuse somebody of being closed-minded and then try to shout them down and try to...
No, that's not necessarily true. Like, you, if he had just expressed his opinion like he didn't like it, then, yeah, people still would have been upset with him, but he wouldn't have been crucified the way that he was. The things that he said were specifically like triggering. Like, dude, you can't say this kind of crap anymore. It's like, oh, well, a movie about girls coming of age, nobody's going to go see that. That's ridiculous. That's not what these movies are for. That's a little backward.
I think the reason I didn't like it was because of the mother character. There was also a very cultural piece to this, and it was prominent in the movie. It wasn't just about a girl coming of age. It was a girl of Asian ancestry who had these very Asian-oriented and grounded traditions associated with their culture and their history.
Man, I feel like I can't add to this conversation at all. As a middle-aged white guy in America with zero cultural influences outside of like hot dogs and guns, man, I have absolutely no basis to like say if it was a good or a bad depiction of what Asian American culture is.
I see why your reaction to this is so superficial.
What are you talking about, superficial? I thought the movie was cute.
Yeah, that's a deliberately superficial word to use to describe it.
I thought it was brave of the filmmakers to address such, like you're talking about, such a taboo subject matter so openly and so directly. Like, it was a very thin metaphor that they were drawing for the entire movie. But, if I was in my 20s and saw that, I would be the film critic aspiring like, oh, this was a very brave piece of filmmaking. As a dad sitting in a room with two underage kids, like, now being faced with the very real, like, I'm not going to say mortal fear, but the very stressful situation of having a conversation that, yes, I do need to have with them, but I'm not prepared for in this moment. That was a little deer in the headlights moment for me. So that I might be tainted by that experience.
Okay, my attitude toward these kinds of things is that I tend to be, I almost feel gleeful when something like this happens. Like, great, something naturally came up in their lives that they're interested in, they're engaged in, and this will give us an opportunity to talk about this thing that's natural, other than like me sitting them down and being like, we need to have a talk.
Man, I can already hear some group, some political organization giving a speech to a group of people right now, talking about how if they allow movies to talk about this in the open, what's next? We're going to have freaking Pixar porn in like less than a year if we let this stay up on Disney Plus.
So I didn't mention this because I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I stumbled into that you're talking about. It's a real thing. I found at least 10 YouTube videos with tens of thousands of views about exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, like you can't normalize anything about this entire process because it's just a slippery slope to pornography.
These are the same voices that I think were against Harry Potter when it went mainstream because it was witchcraft. So I don't pay them a lot of creed. There's always going to be this kind of thing happening. I was just surprised because I'd never actually taken a minute and listened to those voices and what they had to say.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is it's easy to like shout those voices, not shout them down, but ignore them because like, oh, they're just the left field crazies until it's a thing they're talking about just like creeps into your purview and it's something you actually do care about and you do agree with. And then they sound less crazy. Like, I don't know. This is just, let's say this, whether you loved it or hated it, this movie was kind of like, it's clear Disney slid it under the radar because it was going to be a cultural lightning rod. And I think they knew that going into it.
Kinda. It also felt like a bit lower of, I don't know how to say this. Like when a movie came out direct to DVD, sometimes you could feel it. Like the musical songs didn't sound as top notch as the ones on the first run theater releases. The animation quality wasn't quite as good. The story didn't seem as well developed. Like the mother character was such a I don't know what to call it. She was a caricature of a human. Like, she took her daughter's fantasy drawings in her notebook down and confronted the boy they were supposedly of. My kids were so cringing they were almost falling off their chairs. I don't know if what your kid's reaction to that was.
They thought it was hilarious. I was the one cringing. Like, I'm the one that can't handle awkward situations like that. Yeah. I don't know. I think everybody has that. Everybody can resonate with that fear of their parents doing something that's embarrassing them. And I don't want to go into like let's not go in depth on like hardcore character analysis, but I will say just because this movie was a different art style than what has been the norm lately, which I think Tangled was the first one. Like, oh, we're just going to do the slightly off kilter proportions, like Frozen as another one. Encanto is the same way, just like kind of the cartoony looking, but still kind of good. Like, just because it didn't fit into that art style doesn't mean it was less effort. I really actually appreciated like a lot of the random anime expressions that happened. That added a lot of character.
Yeah, where they get like kitten eyes.
Yes, I really enjoyed that.
Okay, it was fine.
It was fine.
We had some great family discussions while we were watching it and after it was over. I definitely don't regret the time I spent watching it. Did I love it as a movie? Not really. Do I like that it broke some taboos and I feel like that more should be broken? Absolutely.
This is Disney at the corporate level, like having its cake and eating it too. It's like, all right, well, we made this very brave film about subject matter that's usually
and we released it
straight
to DVD.
But we hedged the crap out of our bets by sliding it on the radar and doing streaming service only, so we can take all the credit for for all the things that people say it's good about it, and we can downplay. It's like, oh well, we knew it wasn't going to be very good, so we like did all these things to kind of suppress it.
Yeah, including Disney is the parent company that owns Cinema Blend that Sean O'Connell placed his review on, and they took it down and issued a very corporate-sounding apology, basically trying to appease the Twitter mob about how we apologize. We'll add another level of editorial screening before we publish any more reviews like that.
Oh, Ben, didn't you know? Like the 19th floor of the Epcot building is just the Disney's apology department. They have just hundreds of people. That's all they do all day.
What did you think of the magic system of that movie?
This is
the Bad at Magic podcast, after all.
Well, that movie was very bad at magic because my son pointed out several holes in it. Like, for example, the climactic scene where all of the females of this family are going through and getting their pandas, like, exorcised from their bodies in the spirit realm again. My son goes, weren't they only supposed to be able to do this once?
Yeah, they were kind of inconsistent about it, but that was what they were trying to show with like how there are the cultural traditions that are part of the coming of age, and then there's the new experience that every generation has that isn't tied to the past, and the tension that creates.
What I learned is that if you have a normal bodily process that turns you into a raging monster occasionally, all you need to do is go through this East Asian ceremony and have it purged from your body, and you'll be normal again.
Yeah. That I think to me was the deepest, most resonant emotional message that this movie had to give. This idea that you should suppress things that happen naturally because they're not appropriate or they're not proper.
And apparently because it was set in the 2000s, that's when we changed our minds. It's like, oh, all the previous generations, they did that. They're just normal now. But no, my panda, my choice.
See, I wonder why they made this 20 years ago. Maybe you're right. Maybe they deliberately targeted that because that's when that culture clash was happening.
I think they targeted...
That was a brilliant insight, Josh.
Well, I'm just doing my thing where I go off the wing. But thanks, Ben. No, I actually think they said it in early 2000s because this plot can't exist in the world with smartphones. Because if somebody on the planet Earth could turn into a panda, everybody on the planet would know about it within 15 minutes.
Okay, so you had to go back far enough that the technology wasn't relevant, but not too far that it wouldn't make any sense.
Also, somebody really wanted to have a boy band in it.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of boy bands, not at all speaking of boy bands, let's do a little bad at parenting. So I am going to open myself up to criticism here, Josh, and I would like to bring up for the listeners something they may not know about me. I have 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls, and my second daughter has a very unique name.
I remember when she was born and you named her that, and you got a lot of weird looks from a lot of people.
You and I were living in the same location when she was born, so I've known you about as long as I've known her.
You literally forced her into my arms at one point, and I was ridiculously uncomfortable about it.
You have held my daughter, and her name is Russia.
Like the country. Exact same spelling and everything. Russia. Ben, this must make social media really awkward for you right now. Like, Russia just...
something weird?
What's that?
Okay, so almost like a family ritual. On their 13th birthday, they're old enough to go on Facebook, and I'll add them onto Facebook, and then I can add them to the family group so we can share like photos, and she can talk to her grandma and stuff like that. So I went on with my daughter on Facebook to add her onto Facebook, and we typed in her first name, and it was somehow in the list of forbidden words in Facebook's name dictionary.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. in today specifically, the last 3 weeks, it must be really rough being named Russia.
So she's been having a good sense of humor about it. Like the kids at school think they're being clever and they're all making different versions of the same joke. Like, hey, Russia, what'd you invade Ukraine for? And she's like, got bored.
Ooh. I mean, she's a kid, so they can get away with that. But you can't post anything. It's like, oh, I'm so proud of Russia. Russia's doing so well. Congratulations, Russia. Man, Russia is killing it lately. Like, this is not stuff that you can do.
I cannot say those things, at least on like Twitter or something where public visibility. I guess if it's just a limited set of people, like on Facebook where it's my friends, they know that my daughter's named that. Because this week it was happy birthday, Russia. We're so proud of you, Russia. Good job, Russia.
Oh, yeah. I feel like that every one of those posts should have like a big paragraph disclaimer. I have a daughter named Russia. She was born on such and such a date. I do not condone the invasion of Ukraine.
So my mother tells me something that I'd long since forgotten. Apparently, when I was a teenager and I was having just some random conversation with my mom, I was talking about potential names I would name my future children.
Are you a prepubescent girl? That's not something guys do, man.
I have wanted to be a father for so long, Josh. I've loved kids my whole life. I've always wanted to be a father. This is a dream come true for me. So I was envisioning my future family, and I said, you know what sounds to me like a really good girl's name? Russia. I love that name. It's easy to spell. People would know it. No one else would be named that. It sounds feminine. It's beautiful. I love it. And my mom tells me that when I told her this as a teenager, inside her head she was going, please no, please don't do that.
Well, it was also probably the height of the Cold War.
So yes, it was. And she grew up during that. I guess I came in that weird Generation X zone where I wasn't mad at the Russians my whole life. So I according to my mother, she was hoping I'd forgotten about this, never brought it up, never said anything about it. My oldest daughter was born, and I named her Kaya. And my mom thought that meant that I'd forgotten that I wanted to name a kid Russia. When my second daughter was born, my wife and I were talking about names. I brought this up. I didn't bring this up as like something I thought of my whole life. I thought of it for the first time again. It's like having Alzheimer's at age 30.
That happens to me all the time. My wife is quick to remind me of all the thoughts that I've had before that I think are new when I rehave them.
Yes. Thank you, wives, for doing that. Thank you for reminding us that we're already going senile. Appreciate that.
Well, real in the sarcasm there, buddy. No, we do appreciate you. Please don't leave us.
So I named my daughter that, and then my mom told me the story because apparently I'd thought that for a long time. And I still think it's a great name. She seems to like it. The jokes are kind of funny. She never gets that experience where a teacher looks at her name on the roll and says it wrong. And if she tells someone her name, they just write it down. There's no confusion over the spelling.
I guess that's a good point. You should have had her spell it incorrectly on purpose.
No, negative. That's terrible. Parents that do that are bad parents.
I'm a bad parent then because my daughter's name is deliberately misspelled for the same reason.
Your daughter is the hero of Canton.
Yeah. Jane's a girl's name. Jane ain't a girl. Well, in this case, Jane is a girl. But it's our daughter Jane is Jayne.
You're right. I did just call you a terrible parent. I'm standing by it.
That's fine. Well, here's the thing. It's actually kind of a running gag in Nicole's side of the family. My father-in-law's name is Jay, Jay, and then his son is Jason, Jayson, Jay-son.
Okay, and so you named one of your kids Jay, just like her father and her brother.
And we kept the Y going into J. Yep.
I love it. Great. Josh, we need to talk about bad husbanding for a minute. I want to share a little... I want to delve a little bit deeper into an idea I've introduced before in the past in segments of bad husbanding. So my wife and I, in the classic men are from Mars, women are from Venus style, typically have tension over little events that seem to be unrelated, and then I realize all at once that they're connected, and then when I start looking, I see all the connections. So this is one.
Okay.
This category of things are things that my wife considers unclean. Unclean like an Orthodox Jew deciding what's kosher or not.
Okay. That's a little cultural appropriation, but I'll allow it.
So I started to notice this when there were things that she just wouldn't touch or take part in anymore that to me didn't make any sense. And then I realized we were making a different a different calculation on what it was. And what brought the event to my mind was she got in my car with me one time, and it was still during the COVID protections, and she was wearing one of the masks, of course. And she got all done with it and got back in the car, and she said, "Oh, let me throw this away." But the garbage was on my side of the car. I'm like, "Just keep it in case I need it again. I don't have any other extras in here in case you come in again." And she kind of hesitated, like, which I should have taken to mean, I'm never going to wear that mask again, no matter what you say. Even if we go somewhere and there's no other mask and I have to have a mask to go into a place, I'd rather just sit in the car than wear that mask again. That's what the means.
So I'm assuming like a raccoon like got it and like frothed their mouth over it and then spit it
You
back
would
out.
think so. Like maybe I didn't notice, like she accidentally dipped her face in pizza sauce or something like. No. So I stuck it back in the glove compartment. The situation came up. We ended up somewhere. We needed to go in. She didn't have a mask. I opened up the glove compartment, pulled it out, and she goes, "Is that the one I told you to throw away?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "I'm not wearing that." I said, "Why not?" She said, "Because I sneezed in it."
Okay.
Now, to me, sneezing in a mask isn't necessarily a problem. Like, it isn't necessarily a problem.
Well, now hang on, Ben. There's sneezes and then there's sneezes. So
right. My wife never sneezes and there's sneezes.
Okay, fair enough. Go ahead.
Her sneezes are characteristically very tame. But to her, it's binary.
Okay.
I sneeze in that mask, it's done.
Forever unclean.
Yes. And so I asked her, and then she reminded me, and there's a whole bunch of other things like this. For instance, food dropped on the floor.
That food goes in the trash.
Or...
there's no or.
I'm just... I'll leave that one alone. Food dropped on the floor. But it could be something like you dropped it on the floor, but it was still in the wrapper or something. It's just...
Well, I mean...
Food dropped on the floor, period. Binary again.
In the wrapper? Now, you want to gloss over this, but hang on. If Alicia drops like one of those individually wrapped oatmeal cream pie cookies and it's still in the cellophane, if she drops that on the floor, is she throwing that away?
No, but I'm just... No, I was oversimplifying to try to make the point how binary this is. Another one is...
This is binary, Ben. Like, don't eat food off the floor, buddy.
Oh, it's
no wonder
not,
you
though.
got COVID.
Give me a minute to finish laying the groundwork here, and then I'll come back to why it's not binary. Everyone knows about the 5-second rule, Josh.
Not when you have pets, Ben.
We don't have pets. Another one is if something passes below the threshold of a top of a garbage can.
Ooh, the threshold of the top one. There's an invisible plane.
Yes, if it crosses that plane, to her, it is now unclean.
Okay.
Another one is detached hair.
Whose hair?
It doesn't matter.
From what body part?
Head hair.
Okay, that those are different.
I know they are, but to show you how binary this is, she could be touching her own hair, and then some could come off in her hand, and she'll go, "Ew," and change her grip on it so that it's like she's holding a dirty diaper.
Okay.
On your head, fine. Detached from your head, gross. That's how binary this is.
You're quickly approaching that dangerous territory where you're pointing out your wife's psychoses, and she's going to listen to this.
Anything that's past its expiration date, anything, even, and then finally, a wet article of clothing will immediately change, regardless of what it is, regardless of the weather, regardless of any conditions.
I will also change out of wet clothing just because I find it uncomfortable.
I get it. You're not imagining the right thing.
What am I?
Just like you had a glass and it had a condensation. That doesn't happen in Arizona. But if you had a glass with condensation on the outside of it and it dripped onto your pants, you or I might look down at it and go, that'll dry up in 5 minutes.
Wow. Like, how big are the drips that are dripping onto your pants that you need to change your pants from the condensation?
She stands up and goes and changes. So, sneeze in mask, something on the floor, past the threshold of garbage, detached hair, expired anything, or wet clothing. These are all very, very binary, unclean in her mind.
All right, sneezing in the mask is fine. Ben, don't eat food off the floor. I shouldn't have to tell you that. You're a grown man. Anything that goes in the garbage, if it's the garbage, absolutely, that's unclean. Don't touch that. Bacteria comes from there as far as I'm concerned. If it's the recycling, a little wishy-washy. Depends on the texture and the moisture content of the food that you're picking back out of the garbage. Now, what was the next one? Detached hair. Get over it. It's hair. Expired anything? I personally am wishy-washy on, depends on the thing, because
Yes.
I will swear up and down in the kitchen that spices don't expire. Like, all right, listeners, you can fight me on this one. Like,
especially salt, honestly.
Yeah.
Salt with expiration date on it, get real.
Salt has been in the earth for 1 million years in its same chemical compound. It doesn't expire in my closet. I promise you. Yeah. So, again, everybody has their thresholds for this stuff, Ben. It just sounds like your wife has decided she has a slightly higher threshold than you.
You're right, and that's fine. She's perfectly entitled to do that. The problem was the tension was coming out because I assumed in my mind that these were quantitative evaluations that were happening based on biology or physics or something like that, and it's not like that at all. It's qualitative. It crossed the threshold I have set up for determining if this thing is unclean or not. That's it. It's binary, 0, 1. Even in your rebuffs to my things I listed, you were doing the same thing that happens. You're like, maybe if it was in the recycling and it didn't really touch anything else, it's fine. Nope. Not in this situation. So here's the kind of things were happening. Like, for instance, if you drop something on the floor, I kind of make a qualitative assessment. Like, how clean is the floor and how wet is the outside of the thing I dropped? I'm still willing to pick it up and eat it. Things that fall into the garbage. Like, let's say I put something into the garbage and I had just put in a brand new garbage bag and nothing else was in there. To me, it's like the same as if you put it in a sandwich baggie.
I mean, I get that, but what are you pulling out of the garbage that you just threw in there in the first place?
It doesn't matter. You're imagining something really gross. I'm just saying something like, I got to come up with a scenario.
No, I know the scenario. You have that packet of rice, that flavored rice that you tear open, pour into the saucepan. You read the instructions. Yeah, got it. Throw it away. And then 36 seconds later, you've forgotten everything.
Yes, great. And you forgot the instructions. You need to get them out of the garbage.
Yeah, exactly.
But she's not reaching the garbage. Even if it was right on top, perfectly visible, and not touching anything gross.
Yeah, the life hack for that is take a picture of it before you throw it away.
Same with hair. Like, to me, the cognitive disconnect is if you saw it when it came off of you, how can it be gross, any grosser than what's already attached to your body?
All right, so my kids do the dishes, and whenever they're doing the dishes, they're like so finicky and they don't want to touch any of the food that's on the plates. And I'm like, that was literally in your mouth like 16 seconds ago, and you're afraid to touch it?
Yes, exactly. So they have some kind of rule that's qualitative, and you're giving them a quantitative argument. That's what I'm trying to get at here. I'm almost done. If it's something expired, like you said, there's still an evaluation to be made. Some spices, like they're not rotting, they're not decomposing, they're not fermenting, they're not changing. They're still valid for whatever they were valid for. Someone just thought it was a good idea to write an expiration date on the bottle for liability's sake. I don't know.
FDA requires it.
And wet clothing. For me, most wet clothing, it's like, it's fine. It'll dry out.
I don't like wet clothing. I don't like wet clothing.
But you're imagining like you went outside and worked for 20 minutes and got sweaty and you're sweaty and smell. I'm just talking about like you drip some water on your pants.
It depends on the amount of water I've dripped on my pants and
Alicia's pants are donezo. I noticed this because she says it to me. She'll look at me and I can tell it's bothering her, which usually this happens the other way around. She goes, aren't you going to go and change? I'm like, why would I? It'll dry up in a minute.
Oh, no, that's a new threshold. If she gets to the point where she's making you change, that's the next level of.
Yeah. All
right, so I have 2 follow-ups for you about this whole segment that you just did.
Good. Okay, good.
All right, so the first one is, this is a very interesting discussion. Once I was able to look past like the specifics of what you're talking about and get to the qualitative versus quantitative analyses of the decisions that people make ahead of time, that is interesting and worth plumbing the depths of the human condition to figure out why we are as crazy as we are. Second, listeners, I am predicting that Ben will have to make another public apology on behalf of his wife in episode 69. So stay tuned for that.
Well, you haven't let me bring it home yet, and she does give me grace for this, Josh, because I don't have to apologize for who I am. We've been married as long as we have because we give each other grace.
Ben, the first step to getting out of the hole is putting down the shovel.
I'm not going to dig farther. What I've realized about this, and when these kind of tensions come up, now that in my brain I can put all of her rules into a container and go, oh, that's one of her qualitative rules. And then instead of trying to give her a quantitative argument for why her rule is invalid, just accept it.
Oh, there you go.
So now when she does the thing and I'm like, why is she grossed out about that hair? She just saw it on her head a second ago. I could be like, you know what? That's one of her rules. It's gross in her mind. I can accept that.
Understanding is not a prerequisite for respect.
Exactly.
Good on you, buddy.
So that's to sum it all up and bring it all together is that now that I understand this and somebody who wants to make quantitative arguments about everything, I can just put it in the qualitative job jar and be like, all right, I understand that. Done.
I'm still expecting to hear the audible slap when Alicia hears this part of the podcast.
Josh, I think you have a Josh versus bureaucracy for us this week.
I do.
Oh, time to relive the trauma. You have been taking cold showers for like half a month.
No, okay, that's an exaggeration.
You still are?
No. Okay, so here's what happened. It was last week, middle of last week, Wednesday night, I think we noticed it. We both took showers, and it wasn't as hot as it should have been, and the hot water ran out very, very quickly. And so, being the homeowner that I am, I went and checked, it's got to be the pilot light on the gas water heater, because that's the thing that happens. It was.
Is it, though?
It is.
Is that still a thing that happens? That feels like a thing that happened 30 years ago, but that has been engineered out of existence.
Then it happened last week, so shut up.
All right.
I'm going to go with shut up. I go out to the garage, and helpfully the giant sticker on the side of the gas hot water heater has instructions for how to relight the pilot light if and when it goes out. And none of those instructions were working. The pilot light would not stay lit. So I have a broken hot water heater. I immediately, we've already showered, and it's probably 10 p.m. at this point. So I just put in a claim with the home warranty company online. I'm like, you guys need to call me first thing in the morning. I need to get this fixed. And then, of course, you start doing all the other things you do as a homeowner and researching, very in-depth researching, where I YouTube 2 videos and decide I'm an expert. So anyway,
you're being facetious about that, but that's pretty good research compared to what you might have had a couple of decades ago.
No, it absolutely is. So anyway, I go to work the next day.
Go down to the library and get a book by Bob Vila or something.
I had to take an ice cold shower the next morning, and by shower I meant I turned the shower on and flicked water at me while I was standing next to it.
You didn't stand directly under cold water.
No, I'm not that person. So at work, I get a hold of the company. Sends me this thing, says, this plumbing company is going to call you and schedule. And that's a normal thing. They're usually pretty quick about that. But I get to my lunch break and nobody's called me yet. So I see the company that they scheduled me with, and I call the company. Hey, I sent in a home warranty or request or whatever, and they said you were the guys that were going to take care of it, but I haven't gotten a call from you. What's going on? And they said, I don't know who you are. You're not in our system. Nothing came through. We're having a problem getting the home warranty claims. You, Mr. Consumer, need to call the home warranty company and have them call us so we can get this worked out.
Can I call a timeout for a second?
Sure.
I just had an epiphany, and I realized you make these kinds of calls so often.
What is...
I bet if we go back in this podcast, you have a streak going of at least one of these calls a month for a year. Of anything, of getting your car back from the dealer, of getting your internet service fixed, of whatever.
And you wonder why I have so low expectations for the universe.
But are you saying if you didn't call them, nothing would have happened?
Yes, if I didn't call them, nothing was going to have happened. The home warranty company...
on this podcast there was a time you made one of these calls when it was completely unnecessary.
I called the plumbers. They had not received anything from my home warranty company.
All right.
I then called the home warranty company and said, hey, they need you to call them. And the guy goes, that's weird. My system says it's fine. You should be taken care of. And I was like, no, they said they didn't get it. I'm like, let me put you on hold and I'll check. And I was on hold for 20 minutes while they called the plumber. The guy's like, okay, yeah, so they didn't get any of the stuff that we sent them. But I gave it to them all over the phone. They should be calling you any minute to schedule.
That sounds terrible.
They called me back. They say, this is Thursday. This is Thursday at lunchtime. On my lunch break, I'm dealing with this, okay? Our next available appointment is Monday night from 4 to 8. And I'm imagining the whole weekend. Oh God, Ben, the whole weekend with ice cold showers for my whole family. This is going to be nightmarish.
Right. I know that feeling of doom when you're trying to resolve the kind of issue that only gets resolved on weekdays during business hours and the end of the week is approaching because now you enter the weekend dead zone. We will
revisit the scheduling of my plumbing appointment later on in this story. So anyway,
there are things that clearly cross over the line, like active pipes burst or something like that, where you go into the emergency zone. But this is one of those things on the border where people might go, it can wait till Monday.
All right, I'm going to tell you right now. No, that's not what happened. The reason was that any service company doesn't make any money on the home warranty claims. They barely make enough profit to justify having it in the first place. And so what they do is they set those people as the absolute lowest priority possible. And I guarantee, because I live way up north.
Oh, for what? What other worker? I see. The plumbers.
The plumbers. Like, the plumbers are setting me as the lowest priority. And so I guarantee I got a Monday night appointment because they had another appointment like in this area that day. Like, it'd be super convenient just to do it, just to knock it out then instead of having to make a special trip on Thursday.
Why? Did they negotiate some kind of fixed rate or something? Like what?
The home that's transparent to me, what the home warranty does to get all this stuff. But I assume, yes. I assume the home warranty lawyers have hammered out a much better rate for themselves than the consumer gets.
Okay.
Anyway, neither here nor there. So I said, okay, yes, fine, whatever. Go ahead and schedule a thing. Because what am I going to tell them? No? And then call somebody else? I'm getting to that point too. So yeah, I scheduled it for Monday, but then I did all the research, buddy. And I was like, you know what? I bet you this is just the thermocouple, because there's a little piece of wire. This is actually really fascinating. I learned about this. There's a little copper thing with chemicals in it that sits next to the pilot light. And if it gets hot above,
it stretches out.
Well, it does something chemically, and it generates this tiny, tiny voltage. Like, we're talking millivolts. And it sends that voltage to a solenoid, which opens the gas valve, keeps the gas valve open. And that's the master gas valve. And so if
it's a fail-proof safety system.
Right.
It fails closed.
If it doesn't detect heat, or if the thing breaks, the thermocouple itself breaks, it shuts the gas off to the entire heater so your garage doesn't fill with explosive natural gas for no reason.
Sure.
So I'm thinking, oh, well, this is a thing. Thermocouples are a thing. They must fail all the time. I can just replace this thermocouple. And I go to Home Depot. Ben, they've got them for $10. They've got them in multiple lengths. I'm like, oh, I'm all over this. I got this. I come home with a thermocouple on Thursday. I'm like, I'm going to be a freaking hero to my family for fixing this hot water heater in no time. And buddy, I'll tell you what, I had watched all the videos. I knew exactly what I was doing. And I was a pool guy. Like, I've worked on natural gas pool heaters before. So I know how to work with gas couplings and like all of the fittings and stuff like that. I'm no stranger to it. So I'm tearing it all apart, and the tiny, tiny little aluminum gas line that comes out of the valve that feeds the pilot light is stuck. That sucker will not come out of the gas valve, even though I've unthreaded it. Like, it's just like the manufacturer over-tightened it and like kind of shoved it and crammed it in there. And so I'm like being very gentle with it because it's a very delicate little tube. And I get my needle nose pliers and I'm working it out slowly. Oh, it's going to come. Poop. It's like, aha, I totally got it. And I pulled it and nope, the fitting snapped off inside the gas valve.
Oh, no.
Then I was able to get the...
You were describing my nightmare scenario. This is why I don't repair things myself, because something like this inevitably happens. I told you this when you were repairing your shower. Like, you don't know what it is before you start, but sometime over the course of this, you'll have the wrong tool or something you didn't foresee, and it's going to go wrong. And I love it when that problem belongs to someone else.
Well, here's the thing. The thing is already broken. Well, I can't break it any worse. It's non-functional. This is
you were very motivated by the status quo of not having hot water.
But not only that, but it's zero risk. Like, there's nothing I can do to make it worse.
I see. They're still going to fix it when they come.
Exactly. So all I can do is make it better.
If you can fix it for $10 now, then great. You can cancel your appointment.
And buddy, I'll tell you, replacing the thermocouple was super easy after I got that little gas line out. But the gas line was broken. So I go back to Home Depot. I'm like, hey, I got this gas line I need to replace. It's the same brand of water heater that you guys have stocked up and down this whole row. Like, where are these gas lines? Like, oh, we don't sell these. What are you talking about? You don't sell these. You sell literally every other part of this hot water heater. It's like, oh, I don't even know where this would even be in the store. Like, the guy had no clue. And I couldn't find it anywhere online, and so I'm just hosed now. I'm like, well, I broke the thing that can't be fixed, and so I guess I'm just waiting for the guys to show up.
What's the procedure for the plumber? Do they fabricate one?
Oh, no. Here's the thing. I could have gotten the whole... Oh, actually, that's what I did. You're right. I'm skipping part of the story. I went online on Amazon that night, Thursday night, and I found the replacement, the whole thing that I had broken, the thermocouple, the pilot light, the wires, the tubes, the whole like thing for $50.
Assembly.
The whole assembly. Yes, thank you. And it was the soonest I could get it was Saturday. I'm like, so all of Friday again, and then Saturday morning with no hot water. But you know what? It's worth it. So I paid the $50, extra $2 to get the shipping expedited, and now I'm waiting for Saturday. And then Saturday comes, and this thing comes, and I'm so excited. And Ben, I'll tell you what, I threw this thing on there in 10 minutes. Like, just rip the old one out, put the new one in, seal it all back up. Perfect. Done. 10 minutes flat. And then I go through, like, the relighting phase, and it still did not stay lit.
That's terrible. I was expecting. Oh.
Yeah, like like the champion homeowner.
It's
story.
like when you take your computer all apart and then fix something, put it back together. There's that moment where you hit the power button and nothing happens.
Yeah, and it's oh man, just my spirits just plummeted into my stomach.
That's the worst.
And so now I know it's like, oh, okay, so something in this gas valve is broken. This gas valve needs to be replaced. I saw that part on Amazon as well, but it's $250. And I'm not spending that when I've already got the guy coming from the home warranty in 2 days.
Good job not falling prey to the sunk cost fallacy.
Oh, Ben, we're not there yet. Monday comes. Monday morning, I called this place, and they gave me I called them at like...
Why? They told you they were coming Monday evening. Why did you call them?
I called them 6:45 a.m., and I got the message saying, we don't open till 8. Fine. I set a reminder for 8. 8 comes, I call them. Listen, I have this make and model number of hot water heater. This is the
you didn't want to have an extra trip.
This is the exact problem that I'm having.
You want to catch them before they left for the day in their work truck and brought the right parts.
I talked to the plumber. I'm like, listen,
that's a good reason.
I'm not a slouch. I'm not an idiot. I have done the troubleshooting. I know exactly what needs to be replaced. I know exactly what you need to bring with you on your truck. What I do not want to happen is you to drive up here, look at it for 4 seconds, confirm everything that I'm telling you on the phone right now, just to say, oh, I have to order a part and come back in a week. That's not a thing. Like, if you guys can't fix this today, then I am calling someone else. That's how this is going down. And like, I didn't say it as aggressively as I'm saying it right now. So like, guys,
that was so transparent though. That doesn't offend me. Maybe that offends some people, but I like that.
Well, I didn't say it that way because you get more flies with honey. And so I was like, listen, like this is just really hard on me and my family. And I've done a lot of work and research and I used to do stuff like this. And like, here's the information that I can provide. I just want to be as helpful as possible to make sure that this guy is as prepared as he can be when he shows up here. And they were great. Like the person on the phone was like, yeah, totally get it. The guy that's coming out here is the owner of this company. He's been a plumber for 25 years. He knows everything that's going on. Send me a picture of the side of your tank. Send me a picture of the gas valve. I'm going to call him. And he says he's going to go to the supply house and make sure he's got one on his truck before he gets out there. I'm like, that is fantastic. And they're like, all right, he'll be out there between 4 and 8. Wonderful. 4 o'clock shows nothing. 5, 6, 7, 8, 8:30, nothing. This guy.
Wait.
Like, yeah,
you let 4 hours pass and you didn't call him?
No, I called them at 7.
Yeah, okay.
And they had closed at 6. And I was a little upset at that point.
I bet you were.
They ghosted me entirely. They even had me text the picture of the water heater to a number, and I texted and called that number, and there was no answer and no response. And so, like, Ben, I was so done. And finally, I called, like, just out of desperation, just out of, I need another course of action. I need to feel like I am doing something. I called an emergency after-hours plumber. And the guy that answered the phone was exactly what I wanted him to be. He was the actual guy that was going to do any of the work that was going to come out there. And I tell him, like, listen, I had a pilot light go out on my natural gas heater, and it's not working, and I'm at my rope's end. I've been dealing with the home warranty company. I can't handle it. I need this thing, like, taken care of. I can tell you exactly what part it is. The guy goes, it's a ream, isn't it? And like, yes, it is. Why? And he goes, all of the gas valves on the reams sold between 2 and 3 years ago are dying simultaneously. Like
So wasn't that covered under warranty?
Yeah, it should have been. But he said that. It's like, it's covered under warranty, but here's the thing. I can't even get that part. It's not at any of my wholesalers because they're all failing simultaneously right now. It's like, he said, even if I wanted to help you and come out there, like, I don't have the part and I can't get it. I'm like, and so then, like, okay, his name was James. Shout out to James the plumber. This guy was awesome. I go, James, I'm at my wit's end. How much to replace my hot water heater and when can you do it? He goes, $13.25 out the door and I can be there before 8 tonight. And
okay.
Go ahead.
This isn't the first time that you and I have had a discussion about a home warranty. I have a philosophy on these, and I've chosen never to challenge you on it.
Okay.
I don't think these are worth it, Josh. I get... Okay, you know the scene in Incredibles where Bob Parr's sitting in front of Wallace Shawn's character, the insurance guy, and he's like, Bob, the way we make money is by not paying people. Like... That's how these things work. And in order for you to get it to help you, it requires this kind of constant adversarial relationship. And I do not take those things because I cannot do that.
Okay, so we're going to save my thoughts on this for the lessons learned, which I guess we can do now because I was so at my wit's end and I was so done with this that I had James come out, and he was good to his word.
Of course he did.
Within 2 hours, he showed up and replaced the hot water heater with, and he told me, a name brand that's like not going to fail. Like this thing, he told me he guaranteed, like he does warranties for all of his work for 2 years.
So you just chalk this up as like, oh, I guess we got ripped off when we got this hot water heater 3 years ago?
2 years ago by the home warranty company that replaced it. And it's just because it was the Home Depot brand. Like the guy that replaced the water heater the first time when it started leaking into my garage just went to the local Home Depot, bought what they had, and put that in. That's what screwed me, is the guy's laziness by not putting in a decent piece of equipment.
I see. All right.
Here's my lesson learned, Ben. Because I'm 50-50 with the home warranty being amazing and being terrible. And what I've discovered is if it's time critical, or if it's something that's important to you, do not leave it to the home warranty because of this exact reason. There's too much bureaucracy that's going to add a bunch of adversary and a bunch of back and forth. It will save you money, though. When my refrigerator died, they bought me a brand new one when the guy came out a week later and couldn't fix it. That wasn't an emergency because I had another refrigerator in my house at the time.
Interesting.
When I did not have hot water, that like at the beginning seemed like an inconvenience, but quickly became like intolerable. So I should have just called a plumber myself and had him come out and fix it that day. If I had called James on Thursday, I wouldn't have paid any more. I just would have had hot water sooner. In fact, I would have paid less. I would have not paid the home warranty $60. I would not have paid for $50 from Amazon to get the part out to me. I would have paid less money if I had just called the guy in the first place.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have known that. I mean, of course you had to go through what you go to get where you ended up.
But now, that's the lesson I'm taking away from this. The home warranty can be worth it for the non-critical pieces of your house that are expensive to repair.
The way I became jaded about this was my third corporate job was for Sears. And at the time, I worked in the computer department selling computers to people when personal and home computers were just starting to accelerate in popularity, but they'd reach commodity level prices where the profit margins on them were very thin. And so the way that Sears and probably other companies at the time decided they're going to make money on them was by tacking on non-value added services like a replacement program thing that had this impossible legal agreement you sign that says if this very specific set of things ever happens, bring it back to us and we'll replace it with the exact thing, which none of that could ever be true. So it was just pure profit for the company to sell these to people, and there was a lot of pressure on us as salespeople to sell them to them. And I became very, very jaded about that entire thing.
I have no argument. That still exists today. If you've ever bought a new computer from a big box store, you know it comes loaded with a bunch of software that you don't want or need. Yeah. McAfee antivirus people, is a virus. Don't install it. Don't let them suck you into subscription.
So for Bad at Logic this week, because it's an even number episode of the Badger Magic podcast, we're going to do a fallacy, and the one I've chosen this week is called burden of proof. This is a great one. It's a term that you can use to describe who is obligated to prove something in a disagreement. The definition says, saying that the burden of proof lies not with the person making the claim, but with someone else to disprove. And that's where this goes from just being labeling an idea to labeling a logical fallacy. And that is someone shifts the demand of an argument onto the person, off of themselves when the burden of proof lies with them.
Right, and this kind of touches on the conversation we were just having. You said, I don't think home warranties are worth it. And now it's based on your claim. It's the burden of proof you're kind of putting on me to say that they are. But it's a perspective thing. I say, in my personal experience, for the narrow little gap that I've defined now, home warranties are worth it, and it's not on me to prove that or disprove that.
You're right. No arguments there. For Bad English, I want to tell you a fun term that I used to hear amongst my friends in the office when I worked in the United Kingdom, and that was bun fight. Bun fight is very similar to one we've talked about on this podcast before called throwing your teddies from the pram. It's an idea of someone doing something childish that they use to describe adult situations. So bun fight apparently came out in the mid-19th century, and it was supposed to call to mind this idiomatic idea of like a couple of children having an afternoon tea party where there's tea and muffins and crumpets and buns. And inevitably, a couple of children end up squabbling over the buns. And so the term bun fight was supposed to refer to a couple of children fighting over who gets to eat what thing at their cute little tea party. But then this term is used professionally to describe an argument that you might think, an altercation that you as the observer feels is of no importance, like a couple of nursery children squabbling over buns.
Or a couple of grown men arguing about home warranties.
Yes, exactly. That was a nice bun fight we just had. So that was the most common context I've heard it used in. Now, as the British do, they love having lots of nuance and irony to their language. So they've taken this term, turned it 180 degrees, and they also use this term to describe a very formal tea party or other social gathering. This could be including like the Queen and members of Parliament, and they'll call it a bun fight.
Way to go, British people. You've taken one word and it means two exact opposite things simultaneously.
Yeah, I guess the part that ties those two meanings together is the idea that the occasion itself is of little significance.
Is it how you like? Is it the accent that you say it in? Like, if you say it in a high British accent, then it's a formal gathering. But if you say it in like a Cockney accent, then it's just somebody throwing a tantrum.
It's contextual, and you can tell it's because they want to be ironic. Like, we know that we're wearing black ties and that we're going to this gathering where food is being served, but it's of no more importance than a child's tea party.
I'll have to take your word for that one then.
Okay. Now, Josh, you and I interact frequently. We text each other a lot, and we send emails and have this podcast every other week. And over the course of the time period surrounded by this podcast, I have on and off done something for my church called teaching seminary. That's the term we use for it internally. I'm sure we'll get into what that means between the two of us. But lately, a couple of times you've said something to me that even though I've tried to explain to you what it is, what I'm doing, why I do it, what the level of commitment is, you say things to me that make me realize you really don't understand it that well. So I wanted to take some time on the podcast here and let you just ask me a million questions about what this commitment is and what I do. So this is our main segment today, being a seminary teacher in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Oh, got to get the whole title in there. And so a few things at the beginning here is, first of all, yes, it's clear that I had no clear, good understanding of what it is that you were doing. And like the graceful person that you are, you would always just kind of let them slide. Until it was probably 2 weeks ago when you said, it's like, no, I can't tonight. I've got to get ready for seminary in the morning. I told you, I thought that was only on Wednesdays. And you were like, no, it's every day. And that just that crossed the threshold of, I really have no idea what the crap it is that you're doing over there. So let's ask you a bunch of questions. But before we get started, I have 2 notes. First note, Ben, is this one's for you. I've phrased my questions, or I come up with my questions very deliberately because I'm not asking you to get on the altar and give us a lesson. Like, I'm not looking for the content or the material specifically, if that makes sense. Like, we're going to talk about the institution, the organization, and the thing that is seminary, not what is taught there, in specific, if I'm making any sense at all there.
I know what your concerns are from past experience.
Okay.
Go ahead with your second one.
My second note is for me, Josh. Pay attention. This is an interview, not a debate. We're not here to change anyone's mind. We're here to learn and grow as a person. Keep your personal thoughts to yourself, cram them in that little box, and be a grown-up for 10 minutes.
Okay, great. For the sake of our audience, I'll repeat something you already know, and that is I consider the doctrine and the institution inseparable. But go ahead.
Okay, fair. And I will say something that you probably already know. I don't care about either of those things. Okay, so I've broken my questions into 3 categories. And the first one I'm calling the quantitative. And this is strictly like structural questions, like things that should have clear-cut answers. It doesn't matter what you feel about the thing. I just need to know like the facts. So first is the most difficult and the easiest. What is seminary, Ben?
Okay, so sometimes it's hard for me as a person who grew up as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sometimes called Mormon, that the term that I use for it isn't the term that other people use for it. For instance, when I was 12 years old, I was ordained a deacon. And in other churches, deacons are like 60-year-old men. And so there's just this really incongruent, and the word seminary is like that. Seminary in other churches tends to refer to like postgraduate education, preparing you to become a professional minister.
Okay. And that's not what this is. You're not teaching kids to be deacons in other churches.
No, this is similar to what the Catholics call consecration. Now I can't remember what it's called. Crap. Anyway, it's just religious education for teenagers.
Okay.
It's the short term of it.
All right. So this is Sunday school class specific for a specific target audience age group, given over, like, how old are the kids when they get it?
Okay. So the program is 4 years in length, very much intended to coincide with the 4 years of high school. So you start it in 9th grade, you're done in 12th grade, and for each of the 4 years, you study one of the 4 standard works of the church: the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and then we take 2 years on the Bible, the Old Testament, and the New Testament. This year, we're currently studying the Old Testament.
The really cynical part of me feels like that the 4 years of high school line up really well with the 4 years when kids first start really making decisions for themselves.
and so this cynical part of you wants to think that we're doing the best we can to make sure that they won't make decisions for themselves.
No. The cynical part of me has its part. I have those questions last, so we might get there. Okay. Are there subdivisions? Is it the same group of people? Like, do you break them up by year group, or is it just like the same set of kids and you just teach the same lessons over and over?
That feels like it was a short question, but I'm going to give a long answer. The intent is that it's very much like a class that you take. So if like a kid had 6 classes in a day, this is like adding a 7th class. There are lots of different forms that takes, and it's very circumstantial because some areas there's lots of youth, and there's so many youth, in fact, that the church will construct a building adjacent to the high school campus, hire a professional teacher, and the kids will just walk across the street and take it as one of their classes during the day. That's more in areas where there's a high concentration of members of the church.
Listeners, you can't hear me, but my eyes got really big, and this is just one more piece of evidence that when the LDS community puts on the uniforms, stops pretending, and actually takes over the country by force, I'm just not going to be surprised.
Okay, so that's called release time seminary. That's like the highest level. When there's the highest concentration of youth, that's what they tend to gravitate towards, just making it very formal, very structured, and like a class you're taking during the day. The next level down from that is what I do, and that's called early morning seminary. It's not necessarily early morning. It could be any time of day, but basically it's a 45-minute class session that I teach from 6 a.m. to 6:45 a.m. I have 10 kids that come to my seminary class roughly every day, but there's no minimum number other than 1, and there's no maximum number. But if enough kids were in a class, they would break it up and get another teacher. So we meet daily, 5 days a week. If you don't even have that many kids, sometimes they might meet remotely or even independent study and with varying levels of supervision.
Okay. So where do you specifically meet? I know you were talking about the other one, the after release seminary could have its own building depending on the funding levels in the area. I'm assuming you have some kind of common area that you've contracted or whatever.
Yes. Again, so there's no specific time of day this has to be at, but we do it in the morning because that's best. In the past, I've done it in government buildings on a military installation. I've done it in members' homes when the right proximity to the buildings is incorrect, but most of the time I've met in our local meeting houses, and that's where we meet. So my meeting house is 5 minutes away. I drive there. There's one of the classrooms in the corner that's multi-purpose. On Sundays it gets used for Sunday school and singing songs and stuff like that, but Monday through Friday I have it set up like a classroom. I have tables and chairs for the kids. I have my blackboard and my television that I connect to my laptop and show my outlines on, and we watch videos and study the gospel together.
Okay. And so when do you graduate? Is there a ceremony? Do you graduate out of ceremony when you're done? Do you take a test? Is there a standardized LDS test that you have to take at the end of it?
Okay, so I think this is an appropriate time to kind of delve into the controversy of this. It's like anything in life where if you're approaching it as a purist, you think is this going to be on the test? If we turn this into an academic experience to the point where we're giving grades, we're keeping attendance, we're telling you got to answer right or wrong, yes or no, that all of a sudden it becomes so much like school that it loses the soul of it, which is supposed to be trying to take this thing that is faith and belief and apply it to your life. And there's tension between those two because we want kids to come on time, pay attention, be engaged, but we don't want to make it so mechanical that they don't apply it in such a way to their lives that it isn't transforming their heart and soul.
Well, and teenage kids in high school, especially early high school, there's a very strong push for counterculture, like fight the man kind of stuff. And so like it just seems like from the outside, even if you start to feel or have the smell of school on you, they're going to start treating you like that.
Yes. And I think we've talked about this in the past where I gave you the scenario of like, what if you went over to your mother-in-law's house for Thanksgiving dinner and at the end you said, "Hey mom, that was a great dinner. How much do I owe you? Here's $100. It kind of takes what was given freely and because of your personal relationship and turns it into a financial transaction. And it's kind of like that with this tension between school or not. But to answer your question about graduation, yes. Currently, there is 3 criteria for graduation: 75% attendance, 75% daily readings, and 75% on the semester-long assessments that I administer. And those are binary. If you got at least 75% on those 3 things, you pass 1 year of seminary. If you pass 4 years of seminary, you're presented with a graduation certificate similar to a diploma.
Oh, you just opened up so many follow-up questions. What is this evaluation that you are doing on these people?
So it's an academic assessment. I'm teaching them material about people and places and books of scripture. And at the end of the semester, I give them a test with multiple choice questions and free response answers on it.
You deliberately said like 2 seconds ago that you're trying not to be school, and now you're telling me you give them a standard test. You gave me a whole like soapboxy talk about how we can't be school because this is so much more important than school.
Josh, you are really getting at the identity crisis of this thing. There are people that be like, if we could do this, if we could get teenagers to come here from 6 to 6:45 every day and show up on time and pay attention, but we didn't have to do any grades or any checking of their attendance or any checking of their reading, we would do it. But if you remove too much of the structure, they don't participate in, and it has bad outcomes.
Okay. So
there's this tension of not wanting to do those things, but having to do those things.
I get that. There's a certain level of bureaucracy that has to exist in order to make it quantifiable in any sense of the word. Okay. So what does this certificate give you? Like if I graduate from ceremony.
Great question.
Like why? Why do I care?
Okay. Some people wouldn't care at all. However, it is considered a discriminating factor when you apply to any of the church's universities.
The church's universities, name them. You're talking BYU.
BYU, there's 3 main campuses. There's one in Provo, Utah. That's the big one, with like 40,000 students. It's like a big Division I school. There's one in Idaho, and there's one in Hawaii. Those are the main ones.
Okay, who cares? Like, you can go to a state school if you have good enough grades on a full scholarship.
You can. I have kids that are going to be graduating from my seminary classes here who are going to be going to a state school and are still meeting the criteria for graduation, but really there's nothing you get by getting a graduation certificate. But if they were applying to a church school, whether or not they graduated from seminary is considered a discriminator on their university application.
That's horrifyingly exclusive, I feel like.
It's a private church-run school. If you're looking at an application, it kind of fits a lot of the things, because if you go to Brigham Young University, like I did, you're going to be taking a religious seminary. You're going to be taking a religious class similar to seminary every single year that you're there.
I get that, but are they still, even as a private institution, are you allowed to discriminate that way? Like,
absolutely.
Like if a Catholic applies to BYU, they're automatically shot down because they're behind the power curve of not having attended LDS seminary.
No, they have a process that allows for examining people that don't come as members of the church if they apply to go to school there. But it would be the same if I applied to go to Notre Dame and they started looking at how much evidence there is of me being a good Catholic. They probably have a process for letting me in, but I'm not going to have very much evidence.
Is that a thing? Is Notre Dame, like, you have to be Catholic to go to Notre Dame too? Do you have to? Yeah, but do you have to prove your level of Catholicism to go to Notre Dame?
Yeah, sure. Or if you go to Southern Methodist University, or if you go to a Jesuit school, these are things. There are private Christian and other denomination universities that, as part of their admissions process, have some level of discrimination based on your evidence of devotion.
Quantifiable evidence.
Yes.
I'm putting that burden of proof on you. I've never heard of such a thing.
Okay, it's a thing.
Okay, I guess we'll agree to disagree on that, and then like pending further investigation. Okay.
But this is not unique amongst religious private schools.
Okay, So then the last question I had here, and you've kind of answered a lot of it, but like give me the big picture. How is this like and dislike other formal education programs that a kid is going to attend?
Okay, so I have a master's degree in education, and as a professional educator, this very much it follows the same mold of this. It doesn't feel unfamiliar. I start off with objectives, learning objectives. What do I want my students to learn? What evidence am I going to accept as showing that they have learned the things that I want them to learn, and how I'm going to get there. I use varying teaching methods. I use, visual aids, class participation, all those kinds of things. And all that's a very mechanical way of saying what I really want to happen is that they show their faith in God by coming to my class every day at 6 a.m. when they have jobs, when they have extracurricular activities, when they're tired. And I believe that God rewards them for doing that. And the rewards are the eternal kind, that it fills their life with faith and hope and joy and the devotion that comes from trying to do something difficult like that.
Deliberately avoiding gauging you on those things, because I noted at the beginning of this that we're not sermonizing here. This is an interview about seminary as an institution.
And like I've said, I consider those things to be inseparable. How could I say what I'm doing without talking about that?
I will remind the people engaging in this debate that we're going to stay on topic. Please don't, never mind. I was trying to be a moderator of a debate for a second, but I lost my train of thought. Okay, this actually tailors pretty well into questions I have about you. So you're talking about like the preparation and the teaching techniques and things, like the lesson planning, like the content that you are actually shoving down these kids' throats. Where does that come from?
That was such biased language, Josh. Most of the current curriculum that I use very much follows Socratic method, where we are examining the scriptures together, and then we're asking questions to try to bring out the principles that could potentially be applied to our own lives. And what I'm hoping is happening while I'm doing that is that I am leading them through this process so that they're applying these faith-based ideas to their real lives. So my process is we have an assigned book of scripture for an entire calendar year. It used to be I don't want to go into all that. We have a signed book of scripture for a calendar year, and for that book of scripture, there's an accompanying lesson manual that kind of paces out how you do it. So I'm going through the Old Testament, which is like 700 pages long. It's kind of, we focus on the important parts because some parts of it are just lists of names and other parts of it are really significant.
It is very important who begot, okay?
No, that is not really that important most of the time. So, and during all of that, so we'll say we're looking at these 3 chapters today. During these 3 chapters, I will have a learning objective and then an outline, and we'll read some of the material together, work towards it. So every day I spend probably 1 to 2 hours reading through the material, preparing my outline, preparing my lesson, getting ready for the next day, and then, an hour doing it in the morning. So anywhere from 1 to 2 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and a little bit on Sunday. And there's some professional education that goes along with it as well.
For you?
Yes.
Okay. So the fact that you have an outline and a lesson plan, this is coming down from on high then? Like you belong to some organization or are being given materials from someone?
Great. That's a good question. So there is professional curriculum that provided that's designed by people who are, educators as well as faith-holding members of the church.
Faith-holding, like a credit card or an ID, like faith-holding.
Yes. You can't just be like, hey, I'm a really good teacher. Can I come work for you guys and design the curriculum for your seminary students? You also have to be, an adherent to the church.
Also very discriminatory. I am sensing a theme throughout this whole LDS thing. It's like you've got to be LDS to be part of the LDS community.
It's such a weird way to describe it. Why would you want to design LDS curriculum if you weren't a member of the church?
Why would you want to exclude ideas that could come from people that have a different perspective from you, Ben?
Ooh, so I love that idea. I don't understand how that applies to what we're talking about, but I do.
You just said like a professional educator can't just be a good educator. They also have to be like part of the faith. I feel like those two things can exist mutually exclusive of each other, and you might open your mind for a second, everybody. There are some teachers out there that aren't LDS that might have some good ideas about teaching.
I don't know how. So you set up a logical trap for me there, where you made it sound like if I disagree with what you just said, it means I'm not open-minded.
Yes,
so
if you disagree with what I'm saying, you're actively arguing against diversity, and so you're automatically wrong.
Yeah. Why do you hate nuclear surety,
listeners? That's how you set up a logical trap.
No, it's not, because we practice that on this podcast. So what I haven't talked about is money in any of this. Maybe you didn't ask about it because you already. I
haven't asked about it yet, but since you brokered the topic, Ben, where's the money? Where's the money, Ben?
Okay, great question. So those that don't know, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints operates as a lay ministry. The word that means that all of the leadership positions of our church are unpaid. And this is no exception, even though it's, at least a dozen hours a week that you're spending on it. I do that work gratis. As somebody with a master's degree in the area, I'm doing it for free.
Just pro bono, just out of the goodness of your heart.
However, the church has learned, maybe through hard experience in the past, that there's some things that require such a level of commitment and involvement that they cannot be unpaid, and their education system is one of them.
Okay.
So while my local regional president is unpaid and my local minister, my bishop, is unpaid, my regional educational supervisor is a full-time employee of the church.
Every good business knows you got to spend money in sales to get the customers in.
So that person supervises the Dallas area, and I'm on the fringes of the Dallas area. So he has probably a master's degree in some type of religious education and curriculum and instruction, and he is my supervisor. However, so every month I have like an in-service where I meet with him and he teaches us things and we practice skills, and then once a month I'll have an individual session with him where he interviews me and we talk about my class and things that are going on.
Oh man, there are so many layers to this onion. So not only are you committing to teaching these, but these kids that are at best, I'm going to say, reluctant to go into school early, but you are also committing yourself to multiple hours a week in preparation that's completely unpaid, and you're subjecting yourself to the supervision of some rando out in the world who theoretically could have zero appreciation for you or what your skill set is. And
so yes.
Why?
That's where the faith layers on this, because we labor in this effort unpaid because of the love of the children and the hope for the welfare of their souls.
Okay.
So we share that, and I feel that from my supervisor. This is unlike any kind of teaching job I've ever had. And I used to be a professional school teacher. As a professional school teacher, I was a teacher, and I was supervised by my principal, and we had a relationship, and we both had this common commitment to the kids. And we would say these kinds of things, like we are both working together to help raise the future leaders of America, or whatever, the good citizens of tomorrow. We have that same kind of aspiration, but it feels so much more real in this. Like, he cares about me because he believes in the work that I'm doing. And I care about these kids, and I appreciate his sentiment towards me. And it feels like a real relationship.
Okay, buddy. So I have to pause for just a second to reassert all of this stuff, because I get uncomfortable when you put me in these positions. I love you, Ben. This is a safe space. Like, I'm going to do my best not to be adversarial. But this is one of those things where, like, there's alarm gongs going off in my head, just like there's little pieces of things that you're saying that all click into, like, when you say them, like, it's all good things, but for me, like, it's all like lining up in patterns that aren't great. And so this is the part where I'm transitioning. We've answered all of my previous questions about, like, seminary, and I feel like we need to transition to the questions that I have as an outsider with an admittedly confrontational outlook on this whole organization.
I get it. Go for it.
So, like you were just saying, like, when you're teaching this stuff and like the what you're subjecting yourself to and having these discussions, and it's so important to teach these kids these lessons, and it feels so much more real. How are you different in this situation than the lady who swears up and down that their kids have to learn cursive? Because this is undoubtedly a subjective decision or evaluation that you're making over what's important for kids to learn.
Okay, I love it, and I want to stick with this for a minute when we talk about anything. As a professional educator, I was very cynical about some of the parts of the things that we're supposed to teach them.
Right.
As is anyone that goes through the educational system, we kind of have a one-size-fits-all approach where we say, in 4 years of high school, you need to learn these things. You have to take 4 years of English and 3 years of math and 2 years of science and chemistry and all these things, and everybody has to do it, no exceptions. And if you want to get this diploma that's the end of this, you have to do that or you don't get it. Is every one of those kids going to need all those things in their life? Probably not. But we've kind of all agreed that it's better if we just go through this thing than if we don't.
Well, I agree. I agree that there's huge flaws in the U.S. education system, and you're not going to get me to fight you on that hill. But my counter argument to what you just said would be that some of those topics that you were discussing have tangible real world benefits. Like it's easier to draw a straight line from you learn A to you have success B later on in life, or it opens up more avenues for you professionally going forward. Like there's some things that frankly, like arithmetic, writing and reading, like those are universal. You need to know that stuff in order to be a productive member of society. Now, for me, from the outsider's perspective, seminary and the lessons that you're talking about, studying these religious texts in such depth, while I understand and realize the moral and the spiritual arguments there, it still feels very subjective in that there may not be a direct A to B correlation to you learn this and that leads to better success or leads to a better life or a better afterlife or whatever. Like, so sell me as the unbeliever why this is something that so many resources are being dedicated to. What justifies that?
Okay, so here's one close proximity that's on my mind right now. Even if you're not a Christian, you're probably familiar with the story of like Moses and the Ten Commandments and the Israelites leaving Egypt. And almost as famous as that is the story of Joseph. It got made into a musical that's probably still on Broadway right now called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. At the start of the story, Joseph is one of the 12 sons of Israel. His brothers are jealous of him because his father favors him. They throw him into a hole, and then instead of killing him, they decide to sell him into slavery, and they take him to Egypt. If we were just studying this for its cultural significance and studying it like a text, I guess we could just study the historical significance and other bits of evidence that prove whether or not this was true and that kind of thing. But at the heart of this story of Joseph, there's a story of this deep betrayal that he got from his brothers and the impact that had on his life. And that's something that we can relate to now, that you and I can relate to, that my kids can relate to. And here's why it's important. Years down the road, Joseph's brothers come to him. He's raised to a high position of authority in Egypt, and that he recognizes them, and they don't recognize him. And there's this reckoning to be had. You sold me into slavery. You betrayed me, and now I'm here in a position of authority over you. I could use that to exact revenge on you. Or, as what happens in this story, he forgives them deeply and profoundly, and it heals them, and it has impact for years to come. So what I'm doing when we examine that together, and this is the applicability, as applicable as how calculus is a description of how physics applies to life. We're looking at this together. We're talking to my kids about things that are happening in their life and how the tool of forgiveness can help make their life better.
That specific example, which is a good one, is an ethical example. It's almost a philosophical example. Like what you're talking about, the lesson and the underlying morality of that thing can be extracted from the religious message. So if it's that important, then why aren't we just teaching Ethics 101 as opposed to the Old Testament stories?
I just learned something about you, and I'm still assimilating it, but those aren't separable.
Yes, those are entirely separable.
They aren't. You can forgiveness in this context has more significance than just letting something bad that happened to you in the past go. There's a deity involved in that process.
A deity has to be involved if I'm mad at somebody and then decide not to be mad at them anymore? Here's the thing, buddy. Like it's going to be a hard sell to convince me that the religious portion of this curriculum is as important as the moral and the philosophical one, because I'm over here operating under the assumption that I'm living a moral, upstanding life sans any religious influence.
Yes, I think we've established that sufficiently here and in our relationship.
I might be a jerk, but I feel like I'm a moral and a consistent one.
Right. You could take a very utilitarian approach to that story I just told and it would be fine. I get that you feel like these can and maybe even should be separated. That I could get kids together. I could just make this a class that they take in high school where we talk about ethics and we talk about scenarios and how to practice ethics and stuff. But I do not think these things are separate.
And it's clear by the way that you talk about it and just your body language. Listeners, you can't see him, but like I asked that question, and Ben it's visibly on his body that he disagrees everything that I said. And okay, here's one of the more controversial things that I'm going to say, okay? And the reason that I'm asking you and probing specifically on this topic is that explain to me how this isn't like some form of indoctrination or propaganda for kids at a very formative time of their lives.
Okay. So indoctrination and propaganda, and I think you've used a couple other words.
Yeah, those are very, you're right.
Brainwashing.
Admittedly, they're very loaded words.
I am going to accept those words and say, why is anything that we try to teach kids not that? Like,
well, because math is math. Math will explain everything in the universe, whether you believe in God or not. Like we can, like 1 + 1 will always be 2. There is no third party involved.
Right, I get it. There's a faith element of this, and with that faith element in place, it becomes the same in my mind. All those other things.
It just becomes natural law that these are the things that we have to like dedicate to.
Yes.
Okay. So, so we're taking kids at this very important time in their life, and is this a forced program? Are they required to go? Who tells these kids that they have to go?
All right. So I want to be really candid about this. Probably more candid than I would be in front of them.
Okay.
If you catch my meaning.
If any of Ben's students are listening, earmuffs. Just like skip the next couple minutes here.
Yeah. So there's definitely a cultural aspect to this, and there's an aspirational aspect of this. Like you said, these are teenagers. This is a time in their life when they're trying to figure out what they believe, how they belong in the world, whether or not they even want to embrace this church themselves when they grow up and leave home. And I'll tell you, not all my kids that come, I would say, are really strong on that spectrum. Last time I taught seminary 2 years ago, I had twins in my class that graduated. And since that time, I'm friends with both of them on social media. One of them has completely left the church, and one of them is now a missionary for the church.
Okay, and just the fact that you said that, you see one of those as a success and one of those as a failure.
I think it would be really shallow of me to say that.
Okay.
Because I don't think that what I was teaching towards is that particular outcome. I do feel like those outcomes are evidence of devotion to the broader picture, but I think my student that left the church, if she is more kind or forgiving or thoughtful or any of the kind of Christian values that we promote, I consider that a success, and I don't think it's separable from what we talked about and shared together. And I wouldn't say that to her, and I don't believe that.
Okay.
So here's the earmuffs part.
Okay.
A lot of teenagers are just coming because their parents are making them. They aren't. If you're imagining 10 teenagers who are rolling out of bed at 5 a.m. because they're so enraptured by the word, by the word that they're coming to my class in the morning, I would say that's only maybe true of one of my 10 kids.
Okay, well, Ben, you're not surprising me at all with that, because teenagers don't do anything in the morning on their own account.
They won't go to school either. They're going because somebody expects them to and tries to force them to, and that's what's happening here a lot of the time. Do I believe that if we just get their butt in the seat and we actually take some time, that the Spirit of God will work on them and that we'll have a good discussion together and they'll learn something important, whether or not they're devoted to the church the rest of their life? Absolutely, I believe that.
Okay, let's go back to that devotion piece, because I think that plays a bigger role than just like all the little things that you were saying. The fact that the church is a lay ministry and nobody's paid except the education piece. Like that, just that sets off gongs in my head. Like, oh, well, this is because the church recognizes.
That's an oversimplification. One quick example. A few years ago, the church, I think, was having their website published by people who were volunteers. Like, hey, does any of these people that are volunteering their time know anything about web design? Could you put up a website from us? And their website absolutely stunk. And their apps that they offered for mobile devices were terrible. And then you could tell they actually went out and paid fair market prices for professionals that knew how to do those things. And it turned good, and it's a valuable resource. And I'm glad they did that.
Right, but a valuable resource to what end? a valuable resource for internal or for the external face of the church to try to recruit, essentially?
Again, I understand how, from an outsider's perspective, our efforts to evangelize and indoctrinate seem devious.
Not devious. Just
I think they're healthy evidence of the truth of what we do.
Well, looking at this from the perspective of any meme, not just religions, like if an idea didn't want to spread itself, then it wouldn't. So the fact that evangelization is a part of your church is not a surprise, because if it wasn't, then your church wouldn't be. So I don't discredit or discount or discourage or any one of the...
Yeah, it was like that book we read. I forget.
Yeah, Virus of the Mind.
Yeah, virus of the mind. Yes, this is an idea that wants to spread itself, so it has mechanisms for doing that.
Yes, exactly. Now, admittedly, the LDS mechanism for spreading itself is more organized, deliberate, militant, and targeted than a lot of other like evangelizing.
I think it's healthily deliberate in that, like, if I have a continuum of devotion starting from birth or conversion to death, and you want to be devoted the whole time, when am I most likely to lose someone?
Yeah.
In their like 16 to 20
in the formative years.
So we focus extra effort and time on people in that time range to not lose them.
Okay. Oh, you haven't sold me, but you've explained it well enough to me that I accept your answer. How about, I do have more difficult questions to ask. So I have two things. I have a two-pronged, I'm not going to call it an attack. I have a two-pronged question on this one. I'm going to start with this side. Is there any part of the formal education that you are handed from on high that you specifically have problems or take qualms with? And then if there are, how do you reconcile that when you're teaching?
So the first answer is yes. And I think anyone who does, any critical thinker, some very specific ones, I'd rather not get into specific ones, but we can.
That's fine. If you have a general, if you can reconcile the difference between you and the curriculum in general, I'll accept that.
I'll give an overriding principle that it is for me. I can't speak for other people. I think some other people deal with it this way, and that is God's plan for his children on the earth is to teach us, but let us do it ourselves. It's like me teaching my kids to clean the bathroom. Like, it would be cleaner if I did it myself, but I'm not raising bathrooms, I'm raising kids. Okay. So I teach them the principles, I let them do it, and yeah, it's not perfect. And sometimes that results in unevenness on the surface of what we're doing where there's perfection underneath.
Okay. So that sounds like a fancy way of saying you stick to the party line but kind of gloss over the stuff that you're not a fan of?
So they're not recording my conversation. They're not sending someone to my classroom to supervise. I am considered part of the machine. What I do is mostly what happens.
Oh, so you don't get audited, right?
Not really. My supervisor that's a paid employee could come to my classroom if he wanted to. And there's safety mechanisms. I guess if I was saying things that are too far out, the kids would go home and tell their parents. Their parents would start to investigate, and they would, it would bring the local clergy down on me. Those kinds of things.
What does that look like? Is there a SWAT team? Do they wear blue and swing in through the windows with flashbang grenades?
It would be just like this if you were, I don't know, people suspecting you as an Air Force officer were not loyal to the United States.
So yes, flashbang grenades in a bag over your head in a van.
So initially it would be whatever it was that had come up, some false doctrine I'd taught in class to my kids that they were worried about, went home and told their parents about, and then their parents talked to the bishop or the stake president, and he would maybe call me in for an interview, ask me about the specific thing. I'd have to defend myself. That's never happened.
Do me a favor, conduct a social experiment and get your kids to do some really weird ritual the next time they have chicken for dinner, and just see how long it takes to get back to you.
Yikes.
Yikes. Okay, here's my more controversial question. It is, I don't know how well known it is, but it is known, at least to me, that there are beliefs that are held firmly by your faith that don't exactly coincide with what is considered modern or more progressive ideas in society. And I'm saying modern and progressive. I'm not intending those to be biased or there's no value. I'm not attaching any value to this. I'm just talking about the new ideas. There are new ideas in society that the LDS faith typically lags behind a little bit on. So specifically, like I have a couple examples. Like traditionally, the faith has struggled with gay marriage, and I presume that the faith is currently struggling with gender identity becoming a more prominent issue in today's society.
Yes.
So how does that reconcile with the kind of education that you, as a layperson, are asked and required to provide to these kids if they come at you with some discussion topics like this?
Okay, so you've correctly identified that we have what are considered to be very conservative traditional values surrounding those things. But I think in keeping with the spirit of the way you started this off, you're not asking to engage on that specific issue. You're just asking how we cope with that.
Yes, like a kid comes to you, like if you have one of your kids that is having gender identity issues, how do you reconcile like the fact that you're here for personal betterment with the idea that what they're saying goes counter to what you're supposed to be teaching?
Josh, I don't want to be hasty with this, because what that scenario you're describing is probably the most profound, heart-rending part of what I do as a seminary teacher. Because there are kids that have deep and abiding questions about those kinds of things, because they're confronted with them very directly by people who believe something different than what they're being taught and what someone in their life is telling them, and maybe they also feel with part of their heart and soul is true, and they're trying to rectify the discrepancy. And my goal isn't to like beat them about the head and shoulders until they come down on the right side of the line. It's to teach them the same way I believe that God's trying to teach all of us, and that is present them the other side of that equation and then let them decide for themselves, hopefully based on the evidence that God provides us for knowing what the truth is in those kinds of situations.
Are you ever worried that the side that you're presenting, the other side of the argument that you're talking about, might be the wrong one?
I would only worry about that if I felt like I was teaching them to do something that wasn't kind. Like I never am teaching a kid to look down on someone, to be judgmental of someone, to be harsh towards someone, to stand on the street corner and wave signs at them, or try to prevent other people from being happy in their lives. I'm trying to teach them how to be kind and loving and forgiving and faithful and devoted and unselfish.
And I understand that, and that's easy to get behind and say, yes, that's of course that's the right thing, and that can't be wrong. But in a circumstance where if a kid is struggling with their own sexual identity, like either gender or just a preference, like coming down with what you're saying as the other side, or like what the teachings are supposed to be, could actively be making their struggle more difficult.
Yeah. You have entered an area where I can't say I fully feel like I have the answers to all those questions. Like, I've had some very dear friends of mine profoundly struggle with this and end up in a place I don't consider to be in line with what they were taught in the church. We're still friends. I still accept them as my friend, but they've chosen to separate themselves from our beliefs.
Are you worried though that like if a kid is struggling with this, that like I don't know, like I'm putting myself. This is my problem: is I can't separate my.
Maybe
bias.
I'm making one of my kids feel like they're invalid as a person. I am the arm of the church, making them feel judged and separated and unworthy.
I don't want to say that, but honestly, that could be the case. One of your kids could be struggling with their sexuality, and you are like the frontline trooper that's
You're
giving
right.
them these problems.
I talk to them more each week about these things than anyone else in their life.
And in some cases, you might actively be making it worse.
That is the profound responsibility that I feel as a seminary teacher, and I try to be very sensitive to that. The curriculum typically says, all right, in this lesson today, we're going to be talking about God's plan for the family and how marriage is only to be between a man and a woman. As you teach us to the kids, be sensitive to the fact that they may have, and it talks about some of the things you just mentioned and how they might feel about that. And I don't tell them, all right, if you've heard anything else about this, that's wrong and here's the right thing. I say, what have you heard about this? How do you feel about that? How do you feel that goes up against what we're learning right now? What do you think you should do about that?
Okay. Very Socratic method of you. Have an open debate.
Yes, exactly. Socratic method.
Okay.
And they may come to a different conclusion. And you know what? I'd rather that they're thinking about it critically and coming to their own conclusions than me trying, I think, in vain to indoctrinate them in a way that would somehow overcome their independent thought.
Okay. Yeah, and I can't argue with that because I have no personal experience with that. Hopefully that you like you said, you're not actively making it worse, and hopefully you're helping them through a difficult time. But I will say this definitively. As a tax accountant, I know what I'm talking about here. Marriage as an institution is a wonderful method for a ton of different financial and legal savings and just convenience. Like, it doesn't matter what the gender of the spouses are. Marriage is just, it's so wonderful. Like, health insurance coverage from your employer, community property laws. Like, it's such a good thing.
Great. I'll cover the spiritual base, and you cover the tax benefits, and together the kids who we're teaching will want to get married.
And together we will knock any child listening to this podcast unconscious from sheer boredom. Ben, thank you for opening up. I still don't get it, and I'm never going to, but that's okay. I do feel a little more educated about where this is all coming from. It's good to know, and I knew this coming into it, it's all coming from a good place. We're going to argue, and you and I will butt heads about the content of what it is that you're actually teaching these kids. But I think the fact that it's all always coming from a good place, everyone's just trying to do their best, that's something that we could both agree on.
Okay, there's one thing you didn't ask me that I want to talk about a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And that is my experience as a seminary student when I was a high schooler.
Oh, you know what? I just assumed that you were a brown-nosing teacher's pet that sat in the front row, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed every morning.
When I was a high schooler, for 2 of my 4 years of seminary, I lived almost a half hour away from the church. And I had a full-time job, and I was on the track team, and I would show up to seminary in the morning, probably 10 minutes late, bleary-eyed, sit in the back, and barely stay awake.
You were the kid in the Breakfast Club wearing the leather jacket and the fingerless gloves.
This, even amongst members of the church, not everyone can or would be a seminary teacher. It takes a lot out of people. Some people would say no or not be good enough at the things you need to do this.
Well, and that goes back to the whole lay ministry versus all volunteer force kind of thing. If you're not paying people, you're only going to get people that are truly motivated to do it. Right.
As a high school student, it was a big sacrifice. Was I always paying attention? Was I always engaged? Did I learn what they wanted me to learn? I don't know. I am grateful, and I did feel a sense of accomplishment in that I made that sacrifice. I didn't do it perfectly. I did it in my way, but I feel like I devoted a part of my life to something that was important to me and that it paid the kind of dividends that they were promising from the perspective of a student. Now, as a teacher, it's a completely different sacrifice that's being asked of me. I have a family. I have a full-time job. I'm not able to devote as great a deal of time to this maybe as I like or I should be able to, but I give what I can. And I also feel like that has a profound and important impact on my life. And so even though it takes 12 to 15 hours out of my time every week, I feel like that is a sacrifice that I am laying on the altar before God, and He will bless me for it.
I mean, I would hope that every professional educator in the country comes at their job with that kind of dedication. So, I could say bravo and applaud you, but I'm trying desperately to find a sarcastic comment to balance out the positive thing I just said.
I like your meta-sarcastic comments. Or just the form of a sarcastic comment without the substance.
It's balance in the universe. If I say something good, I have to cut your legs out too, or else it just won't balance out.
Yeah. But Josh, you gave me what I was hoping for, and that is I felt like there's this big portion of my life that I'm dedicating to this thing, and you're kind of in and out of my life, and you didn't understand this thing, and I feel like you understand it now.
Do I know more about it? Maybe. Do I understand it? Ben, I'm never going to understand this. This seems like just such a ridiculous thing to me. But again, that's my outsider's perspective talking. I'm trying really. I tried hard not to be judgmental. Take my personal biases out of all this, and I failed spectacularly. But that's what we do here at the Bad at Magic podcast. We take all of our logical fallacies and biases, and we talk about them for an hour and a half.
Yeah, I think that's one of our abiding values here, as we say, Josh, that we're willing to openly listen to each other and engage in discussion. And I think the world could use a little more of that right now.
Oh, it's such a group huggy thing to end on. Do it. Wrap it up.
Well, speaking of engaging in discussion, if you'd like to engage in the discussion, we have lots of ways you can. You can go to our subreddit and you can participate anonymously, or you can go to our Facebook page and we can see what you have to say next to your picture. Either way, you can join in the discussion with us online.
If you like what we do, consider sharing us with a friend. If you like us, maybe your friends will like us too. If you really want to show us some love, consider taking your phone out of your pocket right now and giving us a good rating on the podcast player of your choice. It is unbelievable, the visibility that we get from that kind of thing. And if you want me to make up these things at the end of the podcast every time and once in a blue moon completely space and forget what I'm supposed to say, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.